there is no funding winter for good companies.
India is unique in the sense that it actually converts capital to revenue.
India is very well positioned for the next decade to drive global growth.
There certainly has never been a better time to invest in India.
What is your take on the current fintech environment in India? There seems to be a standoff between the regulators and the companies which had forayed into the fintech, and all of a sudden, we see companies basically pivoting to different business models. So, do you think that financial tech services sector has been impacted as a result of the regulations or the modifications therein?
Sure. So has the sector been impacted? Absolutely. Though I don't think of it as a standoff between the regulators and the industry. There are very clear-cut regulations and guidelines in terms of what can be done and what cannot be done, right? And the smarter fintechs, have always played it within the ambit of the regulations, right? Sometimes they push the envelope too far, which is where, and at scale, this concerns the regulator, which is where then the regulator steps in to tighten those loopholes, right? But broadly, if you look at the large sectors where within fintech, the sectors that attract money, which is credit, be it MSME credit or consumer credit, payments or insurance, the regulations are very well set. There are scaled up companies there that fall on the right side of regulations. So I think that will continue. Going forward, the fintechs will be more conscious of the regulations right from day one. And build businesses which comply and fit to the regulatory processes. So I don't see anything changing. There was a transition period, but I do think going forward things will be smoother.
But when it comes to making money or the capitalization part, it's often said or it's been proved that lending is basically the mainstay of the fintech industry. Everything else will work around lending. So is it important right now for the fintech firms to realize that, for instance, we had these EMI card or the co-branded card companies or even the loan apps, which have ultimately pivoted to lending. So do you think lending is the only way out for all the fintech companies to basically pivot to, because there's such a huge opportunity in India?
Sure. It's a very interesting question. And I think financial services generally are an enabling service. By definition, it is a margin or a spread business. Now, call that margin a risk margin, distributor margin, transaction margin, whatever you want to call it. But it will quite often be a margin business. So the business models have to be built keeping in mind that this is a margin business and not a tech business which has 80% gross margins. All right. So to that extent, I think all financial services fall under that high volume, limited margin kind of business model, right? Within that, obviously, credit, given we are a credit-starved country, has fat margins, but so do certain other products. I would argue insurance distribution has a 15-20% margin, which is actually quite a healthy margin. So I think it's wrong to categorize that credit is the only monetizable or high margin game. I would argue even payments, the volume is so high, you can easily build a $50 million, $100 million revenue company purely basis payments. So I think fintech largely will be the high volume, limited margin game. Credit is an exception given the way the credit environment is in the country, where the margins are, even those will normalize as things get more streamlined.
So apart from fintech, what other sectors do you think will capture the investors' interest in times to come?
Sure. So EV, everyone is talking about it. Really, the future is out there that everyone knows. But what does that entail? OEMs is one part of it. How does the infrastructure evolve? How does the technology evolve? How does IoT evolve in EV? All those are interesting spaces, which I think is one bucket. The second bucket, I would say, is applicability of Gen AI across various industries. We are just about scratching the surface here, but really the potential of that technology to disrupt and enable a lot of businesses, including financial services. I see a big use case in financial services for this, right? Similarly, in consumer tech, the business models could look very different. So I think EV stroke climate and applicability of Gen AI into real world use cases. I think these two could be very interesting themes in addition to the normal product stroke service based businesses that we have in India.
Sure. And tell us about the funding winter. Have you seen the funding winter? People are saying that, there's no likelihood of ending it anytime soon, especially for late stage companies. I just wanted to understand your view
Sure.
on this.
So, are we seeing the funding winter? Of course, nobody can escape it. We see it across our portfolio companies. Omidyar Network India has 75 plus portfolio companies across various stages in terms of scale. So, we do see the impact of funding winter. In some stages more acute than the others. You give an example, late stage or let's say 100 million plus deals, which in India were largely done by foreign hedge fund kind investors. Those have been under pressure. And maybe the early stage ones are not so much, where good teams, interesting business models still find backers. Couple of things have happened though. The diligence process is now more robust, and the evaluation filters have gone up. No longer is it easy to raise large sums of money at high valuations just on a story. People are looking at more proof points. Where there are no proof points, people are spending more time getting comfortable with the idea. Dial back 1.5, 2 years, you'd have deals done in like a week's time. So all that is out. Second, we do see valuation expectations are now reasonable, at least in certain sectors and in certain stages of the company, which again augurs well for the industry. Right? Will this continue? Hard to say, frankly. One thing I will point out, if we do stay with that the larger investors are people who have exposure both on private and public markets. Public markets are kind of rebounding in many places. So suddenly those portfolios could look reasonably healthy, and you might see some appetite returning. Though I would still believe, at least for the next few months, next few quarters, probably investments would be driven by local investors who have presence on the ground, who understand really the markets and can take that call and longer term view.
So one final question. In terms of domestic capital, of course, you said that we have enough dry powder here in India itself. But then there are many unicorns which reportedly are struggling to raise 20-30 million or laying off people rampantly and all. So there are operations being scaled down and all. So where is the gap here? If we have enough dry powder in place, if the investors are sitting with loads of money, but then some of the biggest unicorns basically struggling to stay afloat.
Sure. So I think so let me caveat. I'm not saying there's unlimited money or there's like a lot of money. India is starved for capital, that everyone knows. Though many funds raised money in the last couple of years, and that is the dry powder which is out there. And these are big funds, right? So there is money out there which will go towards good business models. I think the other part of your question in terms of companies struggling, unicorns struggling, I think the gap there is really the business need or the product need exists, and that is being solved. But the way the business has been built around it probably was not built in an optimum manner in terms of cost structures, maybe the valuations. You chase certain wrong metrics for higher valuations and so on. So as long as the underlying problem exists, I think the product service still has value. Probably it's a time to rethink if you would build it from scratch, assuming you had limited resources and in a most efficient manner. A lot of these businesses would look a lot healthier. I think that's the reset that will happen. And good teams solving good problems or good problem is the wrong word, but solving problems which really require some products or services, those will stay, might look different 2 years down the line.
So a lot of pivots to be expected in times to come.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Across all the industries.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much.